Rare earths. China has announced restrictions on export of 7 rare earth elements.
It is starting with the latest in Donald Trump's trade war, this time high-tech.
The US builds the world's most advanced weapons, but it can't finish a single one without China's permission. That permission isn't political, it's material. 17 metals you've never heard of, but without them, your world doesn't work. On April 4th, China didn't ban them. It introduced a new licensing rule. No deadline, no process, no explanation. And just like that, the minerals behind America's tech edge stopped cold. But here's the twist. In the 90s, America gave up control to save money. China took the industry. Today, Washington is stuck, waiting for Beijing's green light. So if the most powerful country on Earth can no longer build without permission, who's really in charge? In April, President Trump unveiled a 145% tariff on all Chinese imports, calling it Liberation Day. The message from Washington was bold, direct, and defiant. 2 days later, Beijing responded, not with rhetoric, but with regulation. China's Ministry of Commerce, together with customs authorities, announced a new layer of export controls on rare earths. 7 specific minerals were added to a restricted list, including critical heavy rare earths used in magnets, jet engines, and precision electronics. Shipments would no longer be allowed to exit the country unless approved through a special licensing process. Rare earth orders that had already cleared customs were suddenly frozen at ports like Ningbo, Qingdao, and Tianjin. Magnet manufacturers from Japan and semiconductor firms from Germany were equally stranded. Even non-military orders were affected, as Chinese port authorities adopted inconsistent enforcement, with some demanding chemical trace tests, others halting all movement outright. The goal wasn't to ban exports overnight, it was to inject uncertainty into the global supply chain. By weaponizing delay, China didn't need to say no. It simply refused to say yes. And within 72 hours, the rare earth market entered its most chaotic phase since 2010. This was not a trade measure. It was a calculated disruption at the core of global industry. Beijing didn't target finished goods. It struck at the upstream materials that every advanced economy depends on. But why are rare elements important? Rare earth elements aren't just important, they are indispensable. Dysprosium is used to protect electric motors from overheating under extreme stress. Yttrium is essential in high-frequency radar, jet engines, and precision laser systems. Neodymium and praseodymium form the backbone of permanent magnets, the kind that power electric vehicles, robotic arms, missile guidance systems, and smartphones. These elements enable torque in EVs, stability in satellites, and precision in drone controls. They're inside
everyday
iPhones,
technology.
inside missiles, inside stealth jets. Even renewable energy is not immune. Wind turbines rely on neodymium-based magnets to generate consistent, high-efficiency power. Unlike steel or aluminum, these minerals can't be substituted without sacrificing performance or durability. Their properties, magnetic strength, heat resistance, atomic stability, make them irreplaceable in aerospace, defense, and AI technologies alike. And almost every ounce of these minerals is sourced from, processed in, or refined by China. China supplies 90% of the world's rare earth magnets, and over 98% of all heavy rare earth refining capacity is under its control.
Trump
Without
said,
access to these
"Let
elements,
no one
even the most
underestimate the
technologically
power of
advanced
America."
countries are brought to a standstill.
In recent
and that
weeks,
is
the
precisely
question,
what has begun
how
to
can
happen.
China beat
The
Donald Trump on
consequences
tariffs,
weren't theoretical,
has resonated.
they unfolded in real time across industries
To the
that
rest of
power
the
the
plane.
American economy.
This is
Tesla, which sources rare earth magnets for electric motors, faced an immediate shortfall. Without
not.
neodymium-based
Electric
magnets,
cars
the
typically
drivetrains that
don't
make
have
EVs
gearboxes
possible
with
cannot
more than
function.
one.
General Motors and other major vehicle manufacturers are vulnerable just as it ramps up domestic production. Lockheed Martin, which integrates rare earths into missile systems and radar components, reported potential supply chain disruptions. For defense contractors, this was not just a procurement delay. It was a threat to readiness.
At the same
Nvidia,
time.
dependent on
The first
specialized
dynamic,
capacitors and
general-purpose
microchips made with
computers
dysprosium and
to machine
terbium,
learning
faced delays in its
software
fabrication cycle.
running on
Apple, whose iPhone vibration
It's taken
modules
some
use
time
praseodymium,
to Steve Jobs
encountered
theater.
shipment blockages from its Chinese suppliers. Even manufacturers outside the direct defense and electronics sectors felt the pinch. Suppliers of car headlights, spark plugs, and even jet engine components all rely on rare earth-derived compounds. And the problem wasn't just raw minerals. China also suspended the export of finished magnets, the most technically demanding products in the supply chain. These magnets are used in everything from robots to satellites, from drones to MRI machines. Some Japanese firms had stockpiles, having learned from the 2010 embargo, but most US companies did not. American firms had no strategic reserves, only just-in-time inventories that vanished within days. And it proved one thing beyond doubt: rare earths are not just components, they are infrastructure. And overnight, China had closed the tap. To the uninformed, China's export freeze came as a shock. But for those who have studied Beijing's past behavior, it was entirely predictable. This wasn't China's first time weaponizing mineral supply chains. It was merely the most refined. In 2010, during a territorial dispute with Japan over the Senkaku Islands, China halted all rare earth exports to Tokyo for 7 weeks. That embargo sent shockwaves through Japan's tech industry and served as a warning to the rest of the world. Many analysts now see that episode not as an exception, but as a blueprint. 13 years later, in 2023, Beijing imposed strict export controls on gallium and graphite, minerals essential to semiconductors and lithium-ion batteries. Minerals essential to semiconductors and lithium-ion batteries. By 2025, China had perfected the model. Target critical materials, impose a license requirement, then withhold the licenses indefinitely. And it gives Beijing asymmetric power over even the most advanced economies. China doesn't need to sanction companies, it simply needs to delay their imports. In a hyper-connected global economy, delay is disruption. And in sectors like AI, clean energy, and defense, disruption is defeat. It enables China to choose who gets access, when, and under what conditions. It allows for case-by-case approval, turning supply chains into political leverage. And it signals something far deeper than retaliation. It's a long-planned move, and it's right on schedule. A strategy that uses rare earth dominance not as an economic tool, but as an instrument of geopolitical control. This level of control didn't happen by accident. It was the product of deliberate planning, executed over more than 3 decades. In 1992, Deng Xiaoping made a quiet but prophetic statement. The Middle East has oil, China has rare earths. That wasn't rhetoric, it was a national strategy. While the US and its allies focused on finance, software, and global outsourcing, China focused on controlling the physical materials of the future. Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, Beijing invested heavily in mining infrastructure. It opened new extraction zones in provinces like Jiangxi and Inner Mongolia. At the same time, it encouraged state-backed firms to acquire and consolidate smaller operations. The goal was clear: full spectrum control, from raw ore to high-performance magnet. But mining was just step one. China also dominated the refining stage, the most expensive, toxic, and technically complex part of the chain. By 2025, China was responsible for 98% of global heavy rare earth processing capacity. It refined dysprosium, yttrium, terbium, and other critical inputs that few other countries could handle. Processing these materials requires vast amounts of water, chemical reagents, and waste treatment, all costly and tightly regulated in the West. China turned this into a competitive advantage. It offered subsidies, lowered environmental restrictions, and poured billions into R&D. By the 2010s, it had also moved up the value chain. Companies like JL Mag, based in Ganzhou, were producing advanced magnets for Tesla and BYD. In 2019, Xi Jinping personally visited a rare earth magnet plant, sending a clear signal of strategic intent. That factory, powered by ore from mines just 80 miles away, supplied the very materials now under lock and key. While China built a national asset, the US let its own advantage slip away. The once dominant Mountain Pass mine in California shut down in 2002 amid environmental and financial issues. For over a decade, America stopped producing rare earths altogether. Even after Mountain Pass reopened, it shipped raw materials back to China for processing. The US had the rock, but not the refinery. It had the need, but not the infrastructure. And by the time Washington realized the cost of its dependence, Beijing was already decades ahead. In the 1980s, America led the world in rare earth production, refining, and innovation. The Mountain Pass mine in California was once the backbone of the global supply. But lax regulation in China, combined with its government subsidies and low labor costs, drove US operations into decline. Environmental concerns and rising costs accelerated the retreat. By the early 2000s, the US had almost completely exited the rare earth sector. The refining infrastructure was dismantled, and the industrial knowledge that powered America's dominance simply faded out of use. Today, Mountain Pass still operates, but only as a raw material supplier. Its rare earths are mined in the US, shipped to China, refined there, and often sent back as finished magnets. The US has no commercial-scale refining capacity for heavy rare earths like dysprosium or terbium, It has no domestic producers of high-grade magnets used in defense systems, and it has no integrated mine-to-magnet supply chain. Not yet. Startups like USA Rare Earth and Phoenix Tailings are trying to fill the gap. They've begun building refining plants in Texas and New England, aiming to process and alloy rare earths independently of China. The Department of Defense has injected over $400 million to accelerate development of domestic capacity. But even under the best-case scenario, full-scale production isn't expected until 2027. 2 years of depending on an adversary for the materials that power missiles, satellites, and aircraft. And that's if everything goes according to plan. The US may be rediscovering the importance of rare earths, but it has a decade of catch-up ahead. And China knows it. Faced with a sudden chokehold on its supply
America's
chains,
trade
the
partners
United
now have
States
90
began
days
scrambling
if
for
they can
solutions.
manage a...
The response was fast, but reactive, fragmented, and years behind schedule. President Trump signed an executive order instructing federal agencies to identify new domestic rare earth deposits and assess their viability. Another directive pushed for expanded mining on government-controlled lands and accelerated environmental reviews. At the same time, the administration began exploring offshore options. Greenland, long known for its vast untapped rare earth reserves, suddenly became a focal point of US foreign policy. Vice President J.D. Vance made an unannounced visit to the island, signaling renewed interest in resource cooperation despite past pushback from Denmark. Trump himself declared, "We need Greenland for national security and even international security as part of a broader push to reduce China's mineral leverage." Parallel to this, the White House entered negotiations with Ukraine, offering defense and reconstruction assistance in exchange for rare earth access. According to Trump, the US is seeking the equivalent of $500 billion worth of rare earth.
My country is not for sale.
Greenland's infrastructure is underdeveloped and local resistance remains high. Ukraine, meanwhile, is still a war zone with no guarantee of consistent mineral exports. In parallel, the Department of Defense has set a strategic goal: establish a complete mine-to-magnet supply chain on US soil by 2027. But experts warn that mining and refining rare earths is capital-intensive, environmentally challenging, and politically sensitive. It requires not just billions in investment, but also a skilled workforce,
women of Lockheed
long-term
Martin.
contracts,
Starting
and
today,
reliable demand. The infrastructure takes years to build. While Washington looks to the Arctic, the seabed, and Eastern Europe, Beijing is already inside the system,
She isn't
flipping
calling the
switches
world's
and
two
controlling
biggest
flows.
economies.
Australia,
In a
Canada,
supply
the
chain
EU,
war,
Japan,
speed is
all
survival.
share a
And right now, America is still in the planning phase. Unlike the 2010 embargo or the 2023 gallium ban, this isn't a blanket cutoff. There's no official ban, no trade sanction, no overt retaliation.
Over a
Exporters
market
of rare
that
earths and
powers
magnets must now apply for individualized licenses from China's Ministry of Commerce. But the ministry has provided no
China's
standard
dominance in
application timeline, no appeal process, and no clear eligibility criteria. This gives the
Traders are
Chinese
declaring
government
force
case-by-case
majeure say it
discretion
could take
over
up
every
to
shipment.
60 days.
If a company is seen as politically aligned, licenses may be issued quietly and quickly.
Begins
If a
a
firm
new
is linked
chapter
to
in
the
its
US
history.
defense sector,
Military
like
and
Lockheed
commercial
Martin or
Gorski.
Raytheon,
Lockheed Martin
the license
creating
may never come.
unavoidable trade.
Beijing
Here's
can
what
now
I
selectively
believe
punish
US
adversaries
tariffs on
without
President
declaring it
Donald
publicly.
Trump.
It can
Also
reward
aside how
economic
Beijing
allies by
is looking to
fast-tracking
mend the
approvals
strained
while delaying
relationship
or
with the
denying
EU
shipments to
to weather
strategic
the trade war
competitors.
with the
Who has
Even
been
firms in
working
Europe
very
and Japan
hard
are subject
to
this
make it
opaque
possible,
process,
but
with some ports enforcing stricter controls than others. In some regions, customs officials demand chemical testing to verify trace levels of heavy rare earths, further slowing or blocking exports. That
Rare
information
earths is
becomes
now a
strategic
geopolitical
intelligence.
weapon.
This isn't economic retaliation. It's geoeconomic calibration, power to turn off the world, one delay at a time. The rare earth crisis is not just a byproduct of tariff. It's about
Mandatory
exposure,
licenses.
dependency,
No magnet
control.
shipments since
While Washington tries to weaponize tariffs, Beijing has quietly weaponized the materials that make modern power possible. Every year lost in building a domestic supply chain deepens the US disadvantage in AI,
Today.
and that alone